Right. It is 12. Welcome. I see that we have about 6 people in the group. I think we are expecting about 9 to 15. So we'll let people just come in. Because this is 30 minutes, I'm going to get going. We're just going to dive in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura Barr. I'm the owner founder of Emerging Educational Consulting. And I'm so happy that you're here because you're here, you're also part of our parent community. This has been a dream of mine for a very, very long time, to have a place where parents could come and get access to curated, accurate information, and to be able to ask questions that can help move their family systems forward. In this case, it's around education, but there's a lot of connections to education and mental health and all these things we're going to talk about today. And so I am so excited and honored to introduce Dr. Dylan Larson-Konar. Did I say it right?
Konar.
Konar. Okay. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. Before I do that, though, for those of you who are here, will you please put into the chat your child's age? It's relevant to us because we want to serve all the people who are here, whether you have younger or older children, and be able to answer those questions. And then the other thing we want you to know is we really do want this to be interactive. So if you have questions, great. If you also would like to enter this room, you can raise your hand. And Hannah, as you can see her, she's our moderator. You can see her lovely picture. She can let you in so that you can actually engage in the conversation if you would like to enter this room. So your video will be turned on when you click the hand icon to request access. And then that's how that works. So I know people call you Dr. Dylan, is that correct?
Yeah, I go by Dr. Dylan Larson-Konar, and then once I start seeing a client, I usually just go by Dylan.
That's what I thought. So why don't you give us a little context of who you are, and then I will start asking you some questions.
Sure. So welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Again, I'm Dylan. Just go by Dylan with y'all, Dr. Dylan Larson-Konar. I am a postdoctoral fellow at Birch Psychology, which is a group private practice over in Denver in Capitol Hill. Before that, I was working at the CAPS, or Counseling and Psychological Services, at CU Boulder. So kind of a college counseling center. So I've worked a lot with college students. Now at Birch Psychology, I find myself working with a lot of late adolescents around 14 to 17, and then also college age students, but all the way up to 60 or so, 60, 65. And I have some specializations in working around OCD and anxiety, but also work with mood-related concerns and trauma, both gender and sexual identity, kind of identity concerns in general. So run the gamut, and really excited to talk more about anxiety today, especially anxiety with teenagers.
Great. All right. Well, I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to dive right in. And I think, tis the season for many of our seniors right now. Seniors who are getting decisions about which schools they've gotten into. And I think this season more than ever, getting decisions not getting into the schools that they wanted to get into. And on top of that, there's also this element of like, how do I choose?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, I know we didn't really prepare for this question, but I'm curious, the anxiety about this idea of, if I don't choose the right place, will I be happy? And of course, being a mom of 4 kids, I know that often raises the anxiety in the family systems. So I'm wondering if you just have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, and like, you did a great job of pointing out all these different angles about why it can be stressful. So one is sort of just the rejection around not getting into a school that you were really hoping to get into. And then I think in that part, it's easy to generalize that sort of rejection, like more wholly to the teenager as a person, as opposed maybe to, sent in an application, they sort of read about me on paper. And then there's a lot of other great applicants. So I think some of the work there for me when I'm working with high school seniors is helping to sort of contain some of that. But then also, honestly, what I'm working with the most is high school students, high school seniors who have multiple options and then feel so much pressure in terms of selecting which school they're going to go to. I think it's for these seniors, it's one of the biggest decisions that they're making at this point in their life. And it feels really consequential. It feels like 4 years. It also feels like, right, my future. And then you also have other like stakeholders, of course, like parents. Sometimes you have like girlfriends in the mix, you have friends, and they have all these things, right? They have their hobbies, they have their classes, they have their major, they have their parents, how close they are, they have cost, and they're weighing like all of these different considerations. And I understand it being really overwhelming. I think the most useful thing that I can say about it, because I have just yesterday I was working with a senior about this exact issue. And for like 3 weeks, we were talking about CU or going to Western, and there are all these different considerations. And what I really tried to reiterate to him was that, to me, it's most important that you accept the responsibility and the autonomy that you're making this decision right now. And I want you to make an active decision, as opposed to have other people feel like they're influencing you to that. And I want you to sort of appreciate also the discomfort around not selecting certain options, and use this as an opportunity to sort of like align your values in terms of what you want this experience to be. Because I think it is really anxiety provoking, but if we're able to sort of like go through that, or manage it, then you're also able to see it as this really exciting opportunity, not just in terms of going to college, but to sort of like, put like a post in the sand in terms of this is what I stand for. This is what I hope for. This is what's important to me. And regardless of college, those sorts of considerations are really important for like our 17 and 18-year-olds to be making.
I love that. I have been literally appointment after appointment after appointment these past couple of weeks having the same conversations. And what I've been trying to do is quantify in a qualitative way what vibe means to them. So vibe means what to you, and then going back to those values, like who am I and my personas, and then what do I want out of my college experience? And in some cases, we're actually quantifying, like, if this is the most important, if what you eat is the most important, then let's quantify that as a number.
Yeah.
And then we kind of go down the list on the spreadsheet. And I think that's been really helpful. And the other thing that I often say is, once we make the decision is made.
Yep.
And move forward in all of your energy towards that, and let go, and love it. Just start loving what's next. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm going to see if yes, Dr. Dylan is up for hire if you need him.
Yes, absolutely.
Openings right now. Somebody just asked that. They're like, can I hire you right now? I'm like, yes. Let's see. I have another question here. I think one of the questions that comes up a lot in my practice, and this is actually a specific question somebody wrote in, is, how do you know the difference between kids who worry and kids who, like, we say, oh, you're so anxious. Like, we use that term quite often. And I would like to add that in my practice in particular, and I imagine that there are people in this group right now who are parents of students who go to East High School.
Yeah.
Where, 2 deans were shot a couple weeks ago. A student died, was shot before that. Like, I mean, what are things parents should be looking for? Like, what's normal, what's not normal? How do parents know how to manage that?
Yeah. I have 2 clients right now who go to East High School, and I'm also working with a lot of parents who have boys and girls in East. So let me get a little bit to that anxiety question, and then I'll transition to that. So in terms of what we might call like normal anxiety versus something that might be like classified as an anxiety disorder, or when you might want to be looking to potentially medication or potentially to therapy, is in psychology, we learn about the 4 Ds, which is distress, dysfunction, deviance, and dangerousness. With anxiety, I'm most interested in those 2 of distress and then dysfunction. So dysfunction is like, what's important to your teenager, what relationships are important, what's important for you as their parent in terms of them learning responsibility with work or with academics, about them having fun, and then whether or not anxiety is really getting in the way of their ability to do that. And then when it gets to the point where maybe a teenager is like avoiding classes or skipping classes, or maybe they're not engaging in their most important relationships in the way that you kind of expect them to be, or they used to be. That's one indicator that it's sort of risen to a certain level. And then distress, of course, is just the amount of like physiological distress they might be experiencing, how intense it is, and then how frequent it is. Another one I would add to the mix is sort of this idea of whether it's disproportionate to what's actually happening in their life. So for me, if I hear someone talk and they're really worked up and upset and distressed, I'm listening for whether the things in that teenager's life sort of align with the intensity of their internal feeling. And if they feel like they're disconnected, that to me raises some alarm bells. So this kind of gets a little bit into what's happening at East, which is, I mean, you just see these, I mean, it's so distressing. I've worked with a lot of teenagers who I think rightfully don't entirely feel safe, or don't know whether or not they can feel safe. I mean, as parents for y'all, and then also for me as a provider who's working with them, I don't feel like I can make promises in terms of it being safe in the future. And it creates this environment where I think teenagers are like reading the tea leaves and are understanding and feeling anxious about that. And it's really like the thing that makes that so hard is that it's not something that I feel like I can help them manage those feelings of anxiety, but they're understanding their reality correctly in a lot of ways, you know, like they're not deviating from their sense of what's happening. And for me as a psychologist with teenagers, it's really important that teenagers are able to sort of be honest about what's happening around them and then to react to that. So, I mean, I wish I had more, just structured advice around them going back to East. I mean, I've had a lot of parents and teenagers about what they want to do in terms of enroll in a different school, in terms of how to feel safe. I mean, I really try to do different like mindfulness or movement-based activities that help them feel more comfortable in their bodies. But beyond that, I think it's honoring what's happened, giving them space to process that in a way that feels most appropriate to them. And maybe that's just being with them while that's happening. Maybe it's talking a lot. And then if this is, I know that finances come into play. I know that convenience comes into place. There's a lot of considerations here. But if the student feels like maybe they need to try a different school, I think like empowering them to do those, like make those decisions based on their internal feelings. So, I mean, a lot comes up here, but it's mostly it's just awful what's happening. And I mean, I've been in the thick of it and not even a parent to a student at East. So I can't imagine what that feels like. And just trying to support these students in whatever way we can, and empowering them to act on their feelings, if that's something that feels feasible for your family.
Is it fair to say things like, this is something we can't control, let's focus on some things we can control? Yeah. And give them options like, you can control where you go to school, but remember, this can happen at any school.
Yeah.
So we can't necessarily control the environment, and we can, those kinds of questions. Is that a fair thing to say? Or is that kind of dismissing their feelings?
I think that is a fair thing to say. And I think it's a lot about, right? So much of what a therapist does is about timing. So there are times where I'm just with someone, they are upset, and I'm just holding their feelings of fear or feelings of anger. And I'm not going to talk about next steps in those moments. I'm just going to be there as they're feeling that. But I do think it's important to transition to, okay, what can we control? And how do we like pull agency from this situation for you? I think that's a really important conversation. And I think that parents have a really good sense often about what their teenager needs to hear at a given point. So yeah, I would say that there are times where that kind of conversation may be too soon or not what the teen needs to hear, but I think that it's a really necessary component of the whole conversation.
One of the strategies that some of my parents are using, and I'm actually curious about your opinion on this as a therapist, is this idea of mindfulness and meditation. Yeah. And I always, in my practice, I always say, Lara Barr says, but Lara Barr is not, I'm giving you research. It's not like my opinion but I try to find research-based tips and tricks for students and parents in my practice all the time. Is there research around mindfulness and meditation, or do you have qualitative research that shows that students who are engaged in those kind of practices that it works?
Yeah, mindfulness it's one of those things. I mean, so a lot of the root of mindfulness comes from more Eastern religions and traditions and cultural practices, and it's being integrated, has been really integrated since like the 60s or 70s into a more like traditional Western approach toward therapy and sort of psychological wellness. And there's been a lot of research in terms of that being beneficial. I don't know any off the top of my head that are about teenagers and adolescents, but I don't see any reason why it would be less effective for them. Um, I think that, and also just to sort of define some of this, because I think that because meditation and mindfulness are used so much in more of a casual way, it can be hard to actually know what it means. When I think about mindfulness, I think of almost a philosophy or sort of a belief system in terms of presence in a current moment. And then I think of meditation as being the practice where we sort of non-judgmentally build awareness, often of our breath, and then sort of note thoughts or feelings that come that distract from that awareness of our breath. And then we practice noticing them. And then we also practice disengaging from them. And that's often how I'll explain meditation or the importance of meditation to teenagers, is that like we spend so much of our life engaging in different things around us. And we don't really practice disengaging. But disengaging is so important, especially when we're talking about like distress tolerance or like emotional regulation. Or like anxiety or worry, like sometimes we have to disengage from a thought that's in our mind or a situation or a stressful experience. And it allows us just to do that in this controlled way. So you can kind of see why that would be really helpful for folks. It allows people to have almost like a safe place to go in their minds when things become really overwhelming. And then also over time, if you sort of build it, it allows us to be less emotionally reactive to different things that are happening internally and also externally. And then when we have that like space between, okay, this thing happened or this is how I feel, and then how am I gonna respond to that? As opposed to just reacting to it in real time. It's okay, that happened. This is how I'm feeling about it. And then just that second of, okay, now I'm gonna respond. And it just like creates this space for choice. And I think that for me, I've been practicing meditation pretty regularly for maybe 8 years, and that's been the most important aspect is the clarification around internal feelings, and then my ability to, not always, right, but more often than I used to, choose how I'm going to respond next.
I love that. I'm a consider myself an athlete, and I bought one of those whoops that like measures your heart rate, and I started using my breathing to look at my heart rate. And I was doing that box breath where you breathe in 7, hold it for 4, and then breathe out like you're blowing out a candle. And I couldn't believe it. My heart rate went down by like 12 beats.
Yeah, it's astonishing.
So I have been practicing that in my own life, and it's like because there's so much information, we can see the data that it's working for people. So that's great. I think okay, so this would lead me, well, first of all, I want to make sure if anybody, please just raise your hand. We are going to stop right at 12:30. So I really want to honor. So you keep coming back, that you trust we're only going to do 30 minutes, but if there's any other questions, please put them in the chat. Or if you came in late, you can raise your hand and you can even join us if you want to ask a question. So I'll ask this question and I'll keep an eye on the chat. One of the questions that I have, I raised for teenagers. Actually, in our family home, we always said therapists were like dentists. Like you got to go to the dentist and you got to go to the therapist. And it is interesting. Students that I have that have experience with therapists have, it's actually interesting because it's like the one thing that separates them from kids who don't is that they have more understanding of their self, so that it's easier for them to write these prompts. That you have to write, because so much about the college application process is know thyself, so that you can share what makes you unique and you are clear about what you want out of college and beyond. And some parents kind of raise their kids with this very communication-based parenting style that's very collaborative. Some parents are still learning. I was learning all along, and still learning, because now I have 20 somethings and mostly I have to keep my mouth shut, but that's another webinar. But how do we get kids to these places where it's like, because my kids were little and I was always like, therapy's what we do, that kind of thing. But I have a lot of students now where I'm like, gosh, have you ever considered a therapist? And they're like, oh, I don't need that. I don't need that. I'm too cool for that. Or, and same with meditation and breath work and things like that. Like, how do we get teenagers to even be interested or engaged?
Yeah. 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 So one that I just really agree that therapy does build self-awareness over time. And I think it's because self-awareness is like so much the tool that guides the change that a teenager or anyone would see through therapy. Because one thing that I think a lot of teenagers maybe don't fully understand is the extent to which therapy is really like self-led, where they're coming in, they're sort of choosing what to bring up. They're choosing how transparent or vulnerable to be to a certain extent, right? That those are some things that are hard to just choose. And they're also choosing how to use the space. And I really like to help guide people through those decisions, but it's not, I'm not going to come up with a topic each day for us to go on. I will say that, so I think the first time I sought therapy for myself was in college, going through stuff around friendships and social relationships, and then started really seeing someone more consistently during grad school. And I think that there's some people where therapy is sort of this checkup that is really important. I think that if a teen doesn't express an interest in going to therapy, I think that they don't necessarily need to, honestly, during their high school years. I don't think it's a necessary thing per se, though I think it can be sort of beneficial to everyone. When I get worried is when a teenager is really expressing or just experiencing like a lot of distress, or when they're sort of withdrawing, or just like when a parent or other people around that teen is noticing that they're not quite themselves. And then that teenager is really resistant to seeking help just in general, right? Because help seeking doesn't necessarily need to be therapy. It's a really effective way of doing it, but it can be talking to friends. It can be like talking to someone in your religious community. It can be finding like a mentor. And then when someone is really locked up, and I see this most frequently, honestly, with teenage boys who I probably work with more often than girls, it's just like a sense of not being able to articulate their emotions that they're feeling and then what to do next. And then also feeling like those emotions, like those negative feelings, are some sort of indicator of weakness or something that they need to push through. Mm-hmm. That's when I really start to hope that they seek help in some way, because it's really easy to like turn off those emotions. And then what I see with those teenage boys especially is that they come to sort of a place of like numbness. And when I'm working with someone, it's so much easier, and not just easier for me, but easier for them to work with like sadness or to work with frustration or anger than it is to work with numbness. And numbness, often we have to sort of like break through whatever is numbing those different emotions before we even can understand what's on the table. So maybe the last piece I'll say is that like it's really important for the teen to be on board with therapy. Like I was joking with one of my colleagues the other day about like sort of goodwill hunting and this idea that like someone comes in and is extremely resistant, and then I over time like break them down and have this like aha moment where we realize like that it just doesn't happen that often, to be honest with you. Like what happens far more frequently is that the person comes in that maybe they're a little ambivalent, but part of them really appreciates what can change. And then collaboratively, we work together and I sort of explore that ambivalence with them. And through that, we arrive at more change. And I bring that up just because I know a lot of parents who have teenagers who kind of wish they were engaged in therapy in a way that they're not. And sometimes it's about building that argument. And honestly, sometimes it's about patience and just like, and figuring out how to maybe to have that teenager like seek help or build self-awareness in other ways. Knowing that therapy is something that's always on the table, and that if it's talked about in a certain way, and if it feels like it's always an option, that it's something that they can turn to when they're 20 or 25 or 30, I think forcing it, there's certain situations where I feel like it, I don't know, there's something is going so wrong and you need some kind of help, and the teenager is resistant to a certain degree, and something needs to happen. But often that's not the case.
I love a couple of things what you said, which I appreciate, because you're kind of like, well, not everybody actually needs therapy, but there's other ways to build relationships. And it's interesting because we built our practice intentionally, not being college consultants per se, but we call the people who support my students mentors. And they're all teachers who have experience in being certified in the curriculum that I wrote. But this idea that there's that we are safe people to
Mhm.
share your kind of deepest moments. And that doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean because you're sad, you need therapy, or
Right.
because you're anxious, you need therapy. There's
Mhm.
lines. And so it's the parent's job is kind of gauging and then, asking questions where am I in the need for a therapist in this situation? I have a
Right.
great question. Some procrastinating and control
Yeah.
and teenagers who, like, as a parent, you're sitting there and you're watching your child slowly but surely put off inevitable
Mhm.
amounts of work that we as parents know is going
Mhm.
to add up to, I mean, possible major anxiety. If only they would get it done in these little bits, then, and if we, how, at what age do you kind of let that go and let them suffer their own consequences? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a great secondary question. Because procrastination, right, it is pretty normative to some level for teens. And like, I mean, I read something that I'm sure a lot of you know too, which is this idea of the brain sort of developing until the age of 25. And one area that we know develops like more slowly or later in life is the prefrontal cortex. And that's our ability to plan, to organize, to sort of see a goal, like a large goal in the future, and then take small steps toward accomplishing it, because we know that if we just do it the night before, it's not going to get done in the way that it needs to. Uh, I think a couple things like, so this makes me think about ADHD or just different sort of areas where executive functioning is really difficult, where maybe the task is just so boring or just understimulating, and the idea of it needing to be right in your face in order to feel uh, the impact of it, in order to actually like visualize the consequences of not doing it, it needs to get to a certain level for it to be stimulating enough to do. And then I also see this with anxiety a lot, and it's almost the opposite, where the task or like the test or the report, whatever, is so anxiety provoking or scary, and then you're avoiding doing it because you don't want to feel the things that you feel when you're considering it and approaching it. So both of those aspects, I think you can help in different ways. For like ADHD or different stuff around executive functioning, I think as a parent, you can try to make those tasks smaller, especially when the child's a little bit younger, and more attainable, and have a sense of some sort of like reward that happens after they accomplish a small part of the task. And I think teachers and mentors also can help with this. That's almost like scaffolding, right?
Mhm.
Make it just like feel more attainable, and to make the consequences more spread out over the length of it. And then with anxiety, I think it's a lot about supporting, but also like being with a student or your child as they are challenging themselves to move past that place of avoidance, to learn that they can tolerate the anxiety that comes with approaching this thing that's scary. So it's sort of like understanding what's fearful about that, while also saying, okay, I really understand that and I support you, and also you can do this, and tell me how I can support you in doing it. But sometimes that means being with them and tolerating their distress and doing it. Your question, Laura, about kind of how old until you just sort of have to trust that the child has this, it's a really interesting one, right? Because they're going to go to college at some point, and then you're likely not going to be there, or they do another option apart from college, but you're not going to be there to sort of encourage this. So I do think it's important for them to feel competent in their ability to do this. And then I also think that it's something that a kid just learns over time and experiences consequences of it not going well, and then what happened, and then trying to, and at that point you sort of have a crisis where you're like, okay, my previous strategy and how I did this was working, and now the work is harder, the work is bigger, the time scale is longer, and now it's not working anymore. And then I guess our goal for all of these kids, right, is for them to have that happen to them. Maybe they have a small failure, but then to sort of renegotiate their strategy, and to maybe even build up the anxiety over time of, oh man, I know what happens when I do that. Uh, and then over time build that. But I mean, procrastination also is really normative. Like when I was working with college students, almost every single college student I had talked about it to some degree. And honestly, for me, it wasn't until grad school where I really kicked it, because you get to thing, or for you, Laura, as you're managing, right, all of these different projects, and you kind of can't procrastinate anymore because it won't get done.
Right. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, I think I can comfort some of our parents that
Mm.
we start earlier than most people
Yeah.
in this process because of that. And I think raising 4 kids and also doing this long enough is that tiny steps over time get the job done. And there's all this stuff that they need to do.
Yep.
We start in junior year and really try to knock out a whole bunch of stuff. But if we can get them by summer, then we're still fine. If we have students, I mean, we won't even really take students who haven't started the process because the crisis level is so high. I just think parents don't understand the amount of stuff that has to get done. And I also know we are done with this meeting, and I'm going to close this out in like 30 seconds. But I know we have parents of younger kids on this meeting today too, which I'm really grateful for, because sometimes listening to this can help backwards plan. Because a lot of these habits, I mean, sometimes our kids just have a mind of their own, right? Like I can name each one, but there are some kids that are super coachable. And this idea of like, we're going to do 30 minutes today of chores, 30 minutes tomorrow. And then that ends up 5 hours of chores we did this week. When all 3 of us do chores together, look at what gets done. Like there's just so many things that parents can do with younger kids that are relevant to the conversation that we had today. So I want you to know that we did not try to leave you out, but that we really I really believe that this is like your end game and then backwards plan to get to this moment. Like breathing with babies is much easier. Doing breathing classes when they're little and breathing with them and showing them how to breathe is much easier than sitting with your teenager holding their tummy and be like, let's do a Buddha breath. So if you're here early, thank you for coming. And those of you who, one of my clients said, we should have you talk to all the students because they don't listen to parents, right? That's their job, is to individuate. So they're not listening to us. So I love that idea. I just don't think they'd come, to be honest. I'm not sure. We'd have to trick them into it and be like, we have a prize. We'd have to give them a prize or something.
Yeah. I'm trying to get into schools right now to do similar presentations, because I agree. The more that it's direct to the student, the better.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, thank you so much, Dr. Dillon. And thank you all of you who came and put in your questions. And I look forward to the next meeting that we have.
Absolutely. Thanks y'all so much. Hope to see you soon.
All right. Bye.